topic of this video is corrections, and more specifically, Scribes and Scribe Filters. On the Scribes tab, the first thing we see is Corrected Scribes. What these two selections refer to is any scribes that might be in an area considered to be a safety distance. Any area near the flange, near a vertical leg or something like that where the scribe cannot get into that area. We have two choices. One would be to move lines, the other would be to cut lines. Move lines will move those scribes outside of that safety distance so that it can be scribed. Cut lines will just cut anything off that is in the safety distance. My normal selection is cut lines. The next selection, Don't Scribe Closed Loop Copes, refers to any web penetrations, things like that are internal to the surface that you may want to, that are originally seen as a cope, and now you're turning them into scribes. If those copes have already been done, you may want to tell it to not scribe those so that the scribe itself does not fall into that hole that's already been coped out. Move text scribes for safety distances. This simply moves any text that's in the safety distance out of the area, out of the safety distance, so that it can be scribed. Generally, you do have that checked. The minimum text scribe height. This will look at any text scribes on the part and will automatically upsize them to this value. In this case, I have it set for 1/2 inch. It will automatically upsize any scribes that might be smaller than that up to the 1/2 inch value. The next choice, create saw scribes for copes from miters. In case you have a miter that cannot be cut, this will, if you have this selected, will add a scribe line to the flange of the beam and put the degree of that cut on the side of the flange as well, so that you know exactly what that cut is supposed to be. Generally, we're taking care of this now on our miters tab that you will that you can see in the separate video regarding miters. The next tab we have is the Scribe Filters tab. On the Scribe Filters tab, you'll notice that you have different tabs for all of the profiles. Make sure that you go through and set each of these tabs accordingly so that you're placing the piece mark and the name settings exactly where you want them, and all of your other settings are changed and set accordingly. So we're going to go ahead and set the angle settings. All of these are identical, so once you know one tab, you know the other 5. So the first thing we have are the name settings, and we have either part name or assembly name settings. In most cases, you're going to want to make sure that your part name settings are selected. The only way that you can have assembly name settings is if you're importing the parts directly from Tekla. So we select part name settings. We tell it where or on what surface we want that scribe to be, how large we want these letters to be, and then what information we want to include. Maybe I want to include the part name, maybe I want to include the project number or the job number, any of those things. We could also include the assembly or the lot number or the lot name if we chose to. There will be a space left between these two values, so whatever the part name might be, and then there will be some space, and then whatever the project number is. You can add anything before it, in between the pieces, or after the pieces if you'd like as well, simply by putting it in these boxes, and it will be scribed on all parts that you run corrections on. The auto position box should always be checked. What this will do is this will move the scribe so that it is not over a cope. If there's a block cope on the end of the beam, it will move it so that it's not scribed in that area. The position of the scribe can either be based on the start of the scribe or the center of the scribe. My personal selection is start, but you may choose center as well, whichever fits your preference. You can tell it to be a delta or a set dimension from the end of the part. Maybe we're going to make it 12 inches from the end, or we can do it a percentage of the overall length. I'm going to choose to do 12 inches from the end. We can also set the gauge value of that scribe. This is the vertical dimension across the surface. We can either do it, once again, a delta dimension, a set dimension from the edge, or we can do it a percentage of the overall height as well. And maybe I'm going to say 25%, something like that. Either way, whatever works for what you're trying to accomplish. Once you have these set, if you do want to set your assembly name settings, you can select this copy button, and what that does is it copies all of your settings over to the assembly name settings, and then you would simply change that to assembly, and now both settings are set up the way you want them. The next thing we have here is the scribe center mark. This will scribe a center mark either on the lead edge of the part or the trail edge of the part, and this simply tells you how far from the end you want to scribe that. The style of your scribes, when you're doing layout for, say, stiffeners or anything like that, or shear tabs, the style of the scribe can either be full scribes, pop marks, or corner scribes. A full scribe will give you, let's say, the full outline of a stiffener. A pop mark will just put pop marks at the corners of the rectangular scribe. And then corner scribes would just give you a short distance, a short length at each one of the corners of the stiffener in this case, in our example. And then the length of that would need to be added right here. How long do we want those lines to be? Okay. So I'm going to do corner scribes, and I'm going to do my corners at a 1/2 inch length. That is very normal. This is the normal way we would do it if we were doing this using a SignaScript. So if we were using a SignaScript tool in one of our drill lines or something, we would use corner scribes, and generally a 1/2 inch corner length is pretty normal, although you can make that shorter or longer if you please. Down here in the bottom left corner, we have the safety distance from flange. This only refers to the petty rider, and basically the flange height above web would be the length of the torch itself, or just slightly less than the length of the torch. And then if you have a flange height that's less than that length, you'll have one particular safety distance here. If you have a flange height that's taller than that, you need to have a different safety distance. So you might have 8 inches here, approximately, and maybe your safety distance is 7/8, and maybe your safety distance above that is then 2 3/4. So those values that may be the type of value that you would have in these three boxes. And like I said, this is only for the petty rider. If you wanted to use a different safety distance for the underside, you can as well. So if you choose to give it some different value, you can check that box and then add that in there. Here, with the safety distance from edges, we're pulling all scribes back away from the edge so that the scribe tool does not run off the edge and cause damage. If you want to scribe your weld symbols, you can check this box. We'll talk more about the weld symbols in another video in just a little while. You can also turn your copes into scribes. Simply by checking this box, your copes are now scribes. However, let's say I have my scribe style set to corner scribes. That would mean that any layout scribes that I have are then going to be corner scribes, where you're just going to see the corners of those rectangular scribes. If I choose copes as scribes down below, the scribes for my copes would still be full scribes. You would get as much of that scribe as you possibly could based on safety distances and things like that. As much of the scribe that the scribe tool can actually do, that's what this is going to provide. Once I select Include Copes as Scribes, it now turns your cope scribes into corner scribes as well. So this one turns them into scribes. This particular choice here turns it into whatever style we have chosen. So that's the difference between these two checkboxes. The last thing we have on this tab is the split scribes for 24-inch window. This is only necessary on the PettyWriter. The PettyWriter works within a 24-inch window, and if you have a scribe outside that, you would need to split that. So just simply check that box, and that would be normal. If I was working on a PettyWriter, I would normally have this selected. That's all for Scribes and Scribe Filters. Thank you.